Trump, once again, is a racist who makes ever more outrageous racist remarks.
Our job is to bring people together to improve life for all people, not to have a racist president who attacks people because they are African Americans. That is a disgrace.
Welcome back. That was two of the candidates who will be on tonight's debate stage reacting to President Trump's racist tweets. And while the president and racism won't be the only issue Democrats on stage are confronting tonight, it may well be the first one. Joining me now from the debate spin room in Detroit is Nina Turner. She is national co-chair of the Bernie Sanders campaign and former Ohio State Senator. Always good to see you, Nina.
You too, Chuck.
Let me start with this. We were just having a fairly spirited discussion about the president and his racist tweets and what he's been doing. And there's advice that says it's a distraction, don't get distracted. And there's advice that says, yes, he's always trying to distract, but this is part of the central problem he's creating in this country. Where does Senator Sanders see that play tonight in this debate?
It's both and. The senator sees it as both and. We do have to deal, though, beyond the bigotry and racism of President Trump. I think the distraction becomes if that is the only focus. We got to focus on the institutional and structural racism in this country that creates this type of environment, and the fact that President Donald Trump is a manifestation of unfinished business. So the senator believes that it is both and, that you must attack straight on. You must call this president out, but also from the policy side and the compassion side of this and the courage side of this, you have to have plans and a vision that takes us beyond just President Donald Trump.
When it comes to what he's doing in stirring this racial resentment that's out there, it just complicates everybody's messaging. And it complicates, you know, I heard Senator Sanders there, he's trying to bring people together, and that's always the message of what they're trying to do. Yes. But at the same time, there are people that want more fight on this. How much more fight do you think Senator Sanders wants to have on this when it comes to the president?
But I think for the senator, the fight is in, number one, defeating President Donald Trump so that we can get to the real issues. And part of the real issues are the divisiveness that this president has created. The next president of the United States of America is not only going to have to deal with Medicare for all or college for all or canceling student debt, but the next president of the United States is also going to have to be a healer, if you will. Probably something that none of the candidates are really thinking about in a deep way. But Senator Sanders thinks about this all the time, which is the policy position is one thing, but recognizing the danger and the disasters that this president has created in terms of how people feel. And Chuck, you're right, how we relate one to another and whether or not we get beyond the divisive nature of this president and try to bring people together. But it is a both and. We just went to Flint, Chuck, brother Danny Glover and myself, to talk to those residents about the fact that they're still suffering. And part of that environmental suffering, whether it's Flint with lead in the water or Denmark, South Carolina, or Ames, Iowa at the hands of factory farms, is do we have a president that can deal with the disparity within the disparity and at the same time bring this country back together and heal the land, so to speak? The president is going to have to, next president of the United States is going to have to deal with that.
As you know, and I think you've been asked this question already quite a few times, probably today, yesterday, the day before, since Senator Sanders and Senator Warren are going to be sharing this debate stage, they share a lot of positions. They share a lot of supporters. I think just today she announced the endorsement of somebody that had endorsed Bernie Sanders 4 years ago. It's obvious you have similar positions, similar messaging. What should a voter that likes both Sanders and Warren, why should they pick why is Sanders the right call for the Democratic nomination, and how does he make that case tonight?
They should pick Senator Sanders because he is consistent and he has been on this journey, a journey for justice for a very long time. From even before he was elected official to this moment, who was standing on the picket lines with the Verizon workers and the Marriott workers, who marched on Canton, Mississippi with the Nissan workers as they were trying to unionize with UAW, who has stood with the grassroots fight for 15 workers as they continue in this country to level that we need a living wage and force Jeff Bezos, and we also know Disneyland, to give our sisters and brothers who work for those two entities a living wage in this country of $15 an hour. And as a U.S. Senator, Chuck, has already gotten over 400,000 people in this country an increase in their wage. Senator Sanders is not new to this. I want the American people to understand that you will know a tree by the fruit that it bears. Not folks who just come into this epiphany because they're running for president, but somebody who has been on the justice journey for a long time. And also, Chuck, who will not capitulate, who has an anti-endorsement list, who has a list of multimillionaires and billionaires who said they will support any other candidate on that stage but Senator Bernie Sanders. His only special interest is the American people. He was polling in 2016 as the candidate who could go head head with Donald Trump and defeat him. That is still the case, and he brings an energy, Chuck. This is not just about who has the best ideas. It's about who has the vision, who has the courage, and who brings the energy. And Senator Sanders brings that heat.
One last quick question. I know it was very important to Senator Sanders to contrast himself with Vice President Biden the last debate. He doesn't get that opportunity this time. Is that something you feel like he can still do tonight, or is it just much harder when that candidate isn't on stage?
I mean, his vision for this country is the contrast. I mean, you have in the vice president who stood up before multimillionaires and billionaires at a fundraiser and said nothing will fundamentally change for you. And you have Senator Sanders saying that if nothing will fundamentally change for multimillionaires and billionaires in this country, then nothing fundamentally changes for the working poor and the barely middle class. So that contrast is there, Chuck. It's there, and it's going to continue to be one that we will draw throughout this campaign.
Nina Turner, as always, good to see you. Thank you for coming on, sharing your views, and representing the campaign. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.